Welcome to Pursuing the Muse. I'm your host, Tom Compton. Joining me today is Mark Guarino, a journalist for the Washington Post and ABC News and author of the award-winning music history book, Country and Midwestern. Today we'll talk about the University of Chicago Folk Festival and who was deemed unworthy to play it, how FBI surveillance targeted the founders of the Old Town School of Folk Music, and we'll also discuss the class struggle behind the Hillbilly honky-tonks of Uptown. So stay tuned. Here's Mark.
All right, Tom Compton here again on Pursuing the Muse. And this is a very exciting change of pace, for this is the first time that I'm not interviewing a musician, but a music journalist, the great Mark Guarino, who has a comprehensive history of the Chicago country western scene, the author of the book Country and Midwestern. Mark, how are you this evening?
Thanks for having me. I'm great. Thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it would be fair to do full disclosure that Mark, I have known for a long time because we both we went to high school together. So
that's right. That's right.
So,
We're true Huskies.
Go Huskies. And I believe I'm not going to brag, but I was on the state championship track team in junior year.
Yeah, I tried for track and cross country for 1 year, and I was the worst. I was the cross country meets. I do remember that I participated in them, and at the end of the track meet, by the time I ended up, everybody was already on the bus waiting to go. And it was kind of a little humiliating. I just realized I just wasn't made out to be a runner or maybe any physical exercise.
I think you still qualify as a state champion.
I don't think I do. I don't think I was a part of any of that. I think, no, I will not accept an award just for being on a team of other individuals that did incredible things. So I have too much respect for myself too, and for the sport to crib anybody's success as my own.
All right, well then I'm going to do more full disclosure and say I did not go to state, but I was on the team, and the team went to state and won without my help.
You didn't have to say that. That was a long time ago. No one would know. Why did you didn't have to say that at all?
Well, I felt like you were owning up to it, so.
No, I think you were on the team longer than I was. I mean, it did seem that you were part of that running fitness culture, and I was not a part of that whatsoever. So I feel like you should have owned that more.
All right, I did work out with the squad. I think if I weren't pushing them, it wouldn't have happened.
Right. I think with running, you really have to be in this. You really have to. Just from the second you start running, you have to be in the zone. You have to be in your thing, and then the miles just, they clip by. And the problem I had was I would start running, and I would be down the block maybe 4 houses, and I would think, all right, how many more blocks do I have left? And then I would go a couple more houses. I'd be like, all right, I just finished half a block. Okay. And I would keep clicking, I would keep tabulating the time left in the time to go. That's really not, I was not zen about it whatsoever. So
Right. The wall was too big.
Yeah. And then,
all right.
Yeah, anyway, I could go on and talk about that. But that might be more interesting than talking about music, but who knows?
Another podcast we'll do Pursuing the Win, or Pursuing the Miles. I don't know. All right. Anyway, you got this book, Country and Midwestern. It is comprehensive. How long did you work on this thing?
Well, probably, I tell everybody 10 years from start to finish, but that may not be wholly accurate. And also it might not be me wanting to go back and really determine the exact time. But I do think it's around 10 years from having the idea, putting together a proposal, waiting for the proposal to be accepted, and then going to work on it to, finally turning it in. So it was quite a long time, and it was the first book I ever wrote. I didn't really know how to write a book. And so a lot of when you don't know how to do something, that actually is a really good thing, I found, because it really forces you to be creative and to do things that maybe if you had done this a couple times, you would talk yourself out of doing. I didn't really know anything. So the book is very long, number one, and it's very, very comprehensive and very detail oriented, because I felt like that's what should do. I should honor the subject by making it very comprehensive and all that. And it seems like that's what people like out of it. And that really did come out of just kind of going into this really blindly. And then it was also an act of discovery too, because I was discovering a lot about the subject myself, as I was kind of getting deeper into down the well.
Right. And was it like you're running where you were like 7 pages in and you were wondering how many pages I have left to go?
Now, I do admit that bad habit I have, I still have it. Not about running, but I'm finishing up a book now, and this book I'm thoroughly kind of sick of. And so I haven't, you start counting pages and you start seeing, okay, what's, is there a light, where's the tunnel here? But with that book, the country book, I really learned that if I look at the book now and I didn't know as somebody else, I would think, boy, how would you even do that, And I just, again, kind of went into it sort of blindly. And I just kind of, one thing I really learned is that, like, if you do like a book, it's really about curating. It's really, you're the one deciding. I had to really decide, how am I going to tell the story? And what do I think that's really important in telling the story? Like, and I felt like I had enough year. I've been writing about music for a long time, so I wasn't just somebody naive or uninformed. I felt I was very informed to tell the story, but I really had to make a lot of decisions about who am I going to include, who am I not going to include. And so a lot of that was really interesting to me, because it really kind of taught me then, when you read stuff, you really also have to think about the time and place and the person who's behind it as well. It's that book is really kind of my perspective on what I felt defined the subject. And of course, a lot of it would be anyone's perspective. There's stuff like the WLS Barn Dance and the Old Town School folk music you can't ignore. But how you told that story, it was really like, I think ultimately with music, I'm really interested in people. And so I could be writing about dance. I could be writing about engineering. I could be writing about aerospace, But what really interests me for any subject is really like telling the stories of the people behind it. And that to me was the real joy, because I discovered a lot of people who were incredibly interesting, both people who I had interviewed and were alive, but also discovering people who are long gone. And but that curation part, that was pretty interesting to me.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's even a similarity with a song, writing a song. You're telling a story of a character, and you're saying, it's a different kind of art, but you're telling stories about people. And I think that's what people can relate to, is like,
right.
That's what we are.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what gave you the idea to talk about the country music history of Chicago? Was it just kind of it was something that was underappreciated and you saw and you just wanted to put a spotlight on it?
Well, it wasn't as straightforward as that, So by the time I started that book, I'd been writing about music in Chicago specifically probably for 15 years. And I had come out of, in the 1990s, covering looking back now, the 1990s was this incredible creative time to be in Chicago. I hate to say it a little bit more than today. It was really like this period of time that I felt so much was going on, and it was like, and so much came out of it. That's the important thing. So much came out of it a decade, 2 decades afterwards. And I'd been there right in the middle of it, not because of any talent of myself. I just happened to be here, and I happened to be lucked out by writing about music when this was going on. I thought, I was in my 20s, I thought this was normal. And it really wasn't. I later learned, it was really completely unique time. And so by the time a lot of that had passed, and so I knew about that time. And in writing about that time, I had learned a little bit about the country stuff that happened beforehand. Of course, I knew the Old Town School of Folk Music, the University of Chicago Folk Festival, John Prine, and things like that. I knew about the WLS Barn Dance, but I didn't know a lot about. They just had, all this stuff had seemed to have been around for just a really long time, but there really wasn't anything like very much in depth out there about why these things were around a long time and what were they. And then there was nothing really that threaded any of the stuff together. And as I kind of looked further into it, I kind of saw that there was this thread that went into it that went very far back. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that by the time I decided to do this book, or I felt there should be a book, it really was the idea that no one really recognized it as anything. And I think that, to me, I felt like there was kind of I think with any writer, especially any journalist, you always feel like fired up when you feel like there's an injustice. and with this, I felt there really was an injustice. There were so many books written about blues and jazz and gospel and et cetera in Chicago, down to the minutia details, but there really wasn't anything about this whatsoever. I couldn't believe it. And then also the history of country music in the greater sense completely left all this out too. You would think that just country music happened to be born from rural people in the South, and then they put a bunch of studios in Nashville, and then that kind of created this boom, and that's not really the story whatsoever. And it's a much more diverse and expansive story than that story. And my book's not the only one that's kind of shown that kind of diversity and expansion. So I felt like there was kind of a reckoning there. And yeah.
Right. And Nashville is often seen as like the sun in the center of a universe, and everything else is maybe a poor stepchild. But it was really eye-opening for me, because I really didn't know anything about the WLS barn dance. How even the barn dance was before stuff like what was going on at the Opry.
Yeah. I mean, part of that reason is twofold. One is, I don't think that people, kind of culture bearers in Chicago, I don't think they knew anything about it. I think they heard something about it, but it was the barn dance really lost its relevancy after World War II, which was quite a long time ago. And if people did remember the barn dance, they remember this kind of not really country TV show by the time it ended up on WGN, like in the late 50s or on 60. It really kind of was, it had really nothing to do with what the glory years of it was, which was really like the 30s, late 20s, 30s, early 40s. That's kind of when the years of it produced all this material and stars and everything. So I think that one reason why it just was forgotten was Chicago forgot about it. And then in Nashville, the people who continue the story of country music were really Nashville-based people, and so there's a tendency. The industry is so big and wealthy and giant, and the Country Music Hall of Fame is such a beautiful, incredible place. It's like this big spaceship in downtown Nashville. But there's a lot of incentive. Not that there was a committee got together and decided to exclude it. I just feel like there just wasn't. It was just, they saw things through local eyes, and also through the contemporary stars of people they knew about. All the stars of the barn dance had mostly long been dead. And so it was like there really wasn't no one really cared to look into it. And I think those two reasons were the reasons why it kind of was just quickly fading into history, and only nerdy academic folklorists were kind of like poking around and looking at it.
Sure. It didn't have the same champions that Nashville had.
Yeah, that's right.
And then even as, the story that you tell, it continues on from the barn dance into the stuff that was happening on Wilson Avenue and Uptown. And that's kind of like, it was really interesting stuff, but it's kind of a common man scene that was happening, and didn't have, again, a champion to tell the story. So I was glad, because I didn't know anything about the stuff you were writing about there. So that was great.
So that part about, Uptown on the north side of Chicago neighborhood, I kind of knew a little bit about that, because by the time I went to Loyola, which is a couple neighborhoods north of Uptown, and in my 20s, there were country bars still left there. So there was still, and it was really a rundown neighborhood. Now everything's being gentrified to hell on the north side, but back then, so there was still a taste of what it was in the 60s and 70s. Some of that stuff was still hanging around. So I was aware of that history at a very surface level. And I'd been to some of those bars. And the last one is Carol's, which is my book talks about. In the midst of writing that book, it had closed, and then it had been reopened and revitalized, which is great. So people could go to that bar and get a good sense of what it was like. But yeah, no, I think that part of it was really fascinating, because Uptown, as the name would suggest, the city, the business people named it Uptown because it was supposed to be this glitzy, entertainment mecca for wealthy people. And then when the stock market crashed and the Depression came, it really never recovered from that. And then it became sort of like a landing pad for poor white people from the South to come up and here for jobs. It's interesting to think about Chicago as a place where kind of laborers came for work, because so much of the lakefront neighborhoods had become exceedingly wealthy with professionals. And so, but at that time, it really wasn't, people didn't care about the city. The city was kind of left, all the wealthy people in the professional class moved to the suburbs. And so, and so that really interested me, because the city, it's a neighborhood still of grand buildings and beautiful theaters and this very incredible architecture. But for most of its life, it was filled with people who were really struggling to live their lives and to work and just to survive. And the country music came from that, was played in those bars, and a lot of notable people went through that neighborhood.
Was that a topic that you didn't see coming, but it kind of emerged from the research you were doing?
No, I knew I always had to talk about Uptown, because I knew about that history, as I mentioned. I knew that a lot of the Southerners lived there. And I was a music critic for the Daily Herald a million years ago, and I actually wrote a story about that once, based on Carol's and a couple of the other bars that were still open. But I just didn't know it as in depth, and I never really met any people who lived there who I would later meet. And also what I didn't know about that's in that chapter is the real class struggle that was happening. That there was this really oppressive push by the city of Chicago to really get rid of these people and to really kind of restrict their rights, and to it's kind of an incredible story. In the 60s, when the mayor's office wanted to really push urban renewal, which meant bringing middle class people back from the suburbs into the city, which now has happened, it meant pushing these people out. And that took a long time to do, but it successfully was done. But in the very beginnings, it was really the Chicago Police Department and all the interests of city halls did their best to really make life miserable for the people who were living there. And out of that came a lot of stories of resistance, of Southerners, and especially young Southerners, people in their 20s who were not born in Chicago, but were coming of age in Chicago in this kind of alien place, were banding together to resist that. And music played a pretty big role in that resistance.
Yeah, and the story of displacement of entire peoples seems to be a recurring note in history, even today.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know. I think it's always, of course, now that's at the federal level, which is, but it's still the kind of same thing. You're just trying to, for different reasons, we're getting quote unquote undesirables out. But it really was, the stories that came out of that were pretty horrific. What's different, well, maybe it's not that different, but I mean, the local media was really against the Southerners and really, characterized them as just really dangerous people who were really going to bring down the fabric of society. I mean, stuff that might seem pretty comical today, but really was the tone of how these people were treated. They were treated really as second-class citizens.
Yeah. Then the book goes on to talk about, I'll claim ignorance. I did not know about the Gate of the Horn before your book highlighted it for me. And you got, there are some interesting characters there, like Bob Dylan's manager, Albert Grossman, and Bob Gibson was there.
Yeah, Bob Gibson was, so I knew a little, I just knew surface level, but I didn't really know anything about it. And boy, the Gate of Horn, I felt like that was this thing that was completely forgotten about whatsoever. And in the, late 50s, again, it's interesting, folk music really was marketed to middle-class suburbanites, as this kind of, music that was kind of a new pop music, and it was very popular. And at the same time, downtown Chicago was kind of just roaring to life with all these jazz clubs and comedy clubs like Mr. Kelly's and all that. And so Albert Grossman, who's a native Chicagoan, business guy, kind of hustler, really a unique Chicago creation. I don't think that he would have existed in any other city, and it ties to the mob and stuff like that. And started this basement club, and all these very famous people played there, and it was really nationally recognized. It was really the first nightclub for folk music. So, again, it sounds odd today, but it really was the first folk music kind of stood up and through the Gate of Horn. Before, it was kind of considered, it was on college campuses and coffee houses. But here, you can get into a suit and tie and go someplace and have a cocktail, and there'd be a guy in a suit playing banjo in front of you. And then all these to really get a record contract and to get booked on the coast, you had to go to the Gate of Horn first to really prove yourself. And artists would have week-long, maybe multiple-week residencies, and every notable name, went through there. So that was really incredible. And the person I did not know about, so a discovery for me, was Bob Gibson, and who's really been forgotten about. Bob Gibson was really an acolyte of Pete Seeger, as most people his generation were. People idolized Pete Seeger. He was like a rock star in many ways. He'd been around for so long. So if you're in your 20s and the 50s, and he had such charisma, and so he, eventually met Pete Seeger and then learned the banjo, and he kind of became sort of Pete Seeger, but without the politics. He was a very clean-cut guy. He was originally from New York, but migrated to Chicago, and he played the 12-string guitar, and he played banjo, and he was apparently an incredible musician. And he got signed to Capitol Records and he's just had a lot of records. I think he was discovered on the Arthur Godfrey show. But what made him significant is that he was kind of this bridge between this older world and then the 60s, this world that was coming up in the 60s. So people like Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, that generation really looked up to Bob Gibson. David Crosby lived in Chicago for a little bit, and he learned 12-string guitar from Bob Gibson and really idolized him. Roger McGuinn learned guitar from Bob Gibson. And so these guys really, really idolized him. Bob Gibson was the first one he introduced Joan Baez to the Newport Folk Festival and really gave her an audience, and she really credits him in her autobiography. But he had a real fatal flaw, is that he had
a dark side.
Yeah, he had a dark side. He had a really bad drug problem, and you would never think it. Because you see photos of him, he was this clean cut. He looked like Opie or something. He had a crew cut, and he was marketed as this clean cut guy. But I mean, he was really on dope, and it really derailed his career. And so he had a couple chances to come back, and he never did. And by the 70s, he was just sort of this patriarch in Chicago and became kind of like this local guy that everyone looked up to. But yeah, he was really a pivotal character for all this West Coast folk scene that would happen in the 60s. So,
correct me if I'm wrong, but did you point out that George Hamilton got a start with Bob Gibson?
I think George Hamilton is in my book, isn't he? I think so. I wrote it a long time ago. I got to look up that page. I think because George Hamilton,
they were doing like a duo thing, right?
Oh no, you're thinking of something. You're thinking of it's Hamilton Camp.
Oh, okay.
But Hamilton Camp was a Second City guy, and so Hamilton Camp was more of a comedian. And they recorded a very excellent record called Hamilton Camp at the Gate of Horn. It was a live record at the Gate of Horn. So if you really want to hear what it was like to be at the Gate of Horn, you can play that record, and it has all the audience chatter and stuff like that. And that record was a huge record. That record really kind of put them in every home across America.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank you for not correcting me. I'm calling it the Gate of the Horn.
Yes.
As a Chicagoan, I do this, it's like the Jewel.
The Jewel. Oh, you always want to put a "the" in front of everything. Yeah.
The Bears, the Jewel, the Gate of
it's kind of a reverential sort of approach to everything, It's
part of my Chicago card.
Right.
So, and then let's talk about the Old Town School of Folk Music, which is still like a mainstay. And when did that start?
So the Old Town School of Folk Music started in 1957. And it came out of the Gate of Horn, which is, and it really was, again, this kind of real interest in folk music. And boy, I could go on and on about the Old Town School. The Old Town School was really fundamental. I think today we kind of take it for granted. People think of it as a place just to go take guitar lessons or see a concert. That, yes, you can do those things. But the Old Town School really came out of a time where there was a lot of worry about electronic media and rock and roll, and the world was changing, and folk music at its core was really about community, and it really was about people singing together. And that's what people who kind of rediscovered old records when they were in the 50s, that's what they kind of saw the music as sort of a way to get rid of technology and to really get into a room and sing together, and that it would actually make the world a better place if everyone did that. And the school really came out of that. It really wasn't about learning chords or learning techniques. It was really about learning songs and learning how to be in a community. And that really was the mission of the Old Town School way back when, and they did really build this incredible community at that time. And I always think of it as this kind of improbable place, a place that probably shouldn't exist. because the people that formed it had nothing in common. And I think that speaks to the point of the whole school. The first guitar teacher was a guy in his 20s from Los Angeles who had met Woody Guthrie, had traveled around the country, was learning a lot of old songs, and he was a wonderful guitarist. And he was the house guitarist at the Gate of Horn. The second person was a housewife, actually, from Oak Park. And she was an enthusiast for the music and would occasionally have a lot of the musicians who were passing through town, touring musicians who were playing at the Gate of Horn, stay at her home on Lombard Avenue, right off of between Washington and Lake Street.
Yeah, I know where that is.
Yeah, yep. And the house is still there. And the third person was this guy named Win Strachey, who did have incredible bona fides. And he was later in his life when it happened. And he was an early television personality. He was a friend of Studs Terkel. He had formed something called I Come For To Sing with Studs, and they would go around the country singing folk songs. And he was kind of down and out. He was at the kind of really bottom of his career, and it was his idea to start that school, and all three of them met at the Gate of Horn. And it started in Dawn Greening's. It's the woman in her living room. That origin story of the Old Town School is out there. But what really was not out, that was the biggest point of discovery for me for the book, was that school and how much of an impact that school made nationwide. People would come to Chicago to learn how they were teaching music, so they would go back to wherever they came from to go replicate it. It was a nationally renowned just focal point for the music. And I want to really emphasize, it wasn't just a school that made it special. It was this kind of the approach to community and the music, and the school was in the communities. So it really was hugely influential on a national scale. And I was really moved by finding all these stories of people, not just from the U.S., there were people coming in from other countries to kind of go there because of what they were doing there.
Yeah. And Wynn was an interesting story too, where he kind of was like a victim of McCarthyism, and that's the other discovery I found. I mean, it was the middle of the 50s, right? And folk music at that time was considered radical, and it was and I knew Studs Terkel had a FBI file. And so I decided just to basically go and write the FBI and see if I can request the files of all the people I just mentioned, not knowing if they had files, but just to see if, like, just throwing it against the wall and see what would show up. And a year later, their FBI file showed up, and so the FBI had all these people under surveillance in the very early days, which is really incredible if you think about it. But the FBI did really do a lot of damage to Win Strachey's. The FBI talked to his employers, talked to his family. He lost a bunch of jobs. He was blacklisted. Yeah. And so he was a very well-known, he was an actor. He was on the radio. He was the singer at the First Presbyterian Church on Michigan Avenue. He lost all those jobs. And so it was that his story was completely unknown, and also unknown to his family. I made copies and gave it to his daughter, and they had absolutely no idea that was going on. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. It was very cool. Yeah.
So, and, as awful as, the FBI can be with, ruining someone's life, at the end of the road, at least there was like a silver lining of, the Old Town School of Folk Music might not exist without,
Yeah, it was really his legacy. And the legacy of all those people, that first generation, really, that first generation carried it through to the 70s and the mid 70s about, and the first generation of teachers were students themselves, and it was an ad hoc organization. It wasn't really like as professional as we think of now. And there were a lot of great stories that come out of that, the first 10, 15 years of musicians who were really people who, saw the music. I mean, it was kind of an underground thing. Maybe underground's too dramatic of a word, but it wasn't really, rock and roll by the mid '60s had killed folk music, so it wasn't popular on this mass scale. But people were dedicated to the feeling like this thing was going to die out, and these songs and the stories they tell are older than us and older than Chicago, and they go back very far, and they're worth preserving and still singing and all that. And so, yeah, if it wasn't, there was a second folk boom in the 70s, and that produced John Prine. And if it really wasn't for the Old Town School, none of that would have happened, because the school gave all of this new generation of people who were in their 20s and the 70s, they gave them work. It gave them classes to learn stuff. It was like a community center. There was a store to go buy stuff and to go learn. And so, like, without the reason all that stuff was happening in Chicago and it wasn't happening anywhere else was really because of the Old Town School's presence in Chicago, active presence. And so, yeah, it was very, very, I think a lot of people forget that.
Yeah. And you mentioned John Prine, and one of the revelations I had, I mean, John Prine is just like, you could put him on a songwriter Mount Rushmore, and you don't get much more Chicago than John Prine at the same time.
Right.
What was really interesting is what you pointed out about his older brother and the influence he had on John.
Yeah, and I think he's kind of a little bit of the forgotten story too. His older brother's named Dave Prine. So John Prine had three brothers, and a younger brother, an older brother, and a middle brother. And Dave Prine, when John Prine was still a kid, more or less, was part of this kind of that scene I was just talking about, this scene in the 60s and early 70s of people who really saw the value of this music, but it wasn't popular. He formed like a club that would get together and do jams and play the music. And eventually he had a duo that played for years and years and years and he was an electrical engineer by trade. And so, but he kind of kept that music. He was part of this very small group that kept that music going, and really had a guitar in the house, and really introduced his younger brother, to the Old Town School, and would later actually play on one or two Prine records. When he played really he played fiddle, he played banjo, he played guitar, and they had a Southern home, and so it had a real old time feeling in his playing that I think was not too far removed from the family history in Kentucky.
Nice, yeah. There's something about brothers in music. They keep reemerging.
That's right.
So there was also this festival in Hyde Park, and it was kind of interesting that Bob Dylan was deemed unworthy of appearing at the inaugural event.
Yeah, I know. That's the other kind of, and think about all the books about Bob Dylan that are out there. And I got to say, this was a part of Bob Dylan's trajectory that is not in any of those books. I'm not patting myself on the back. I just couldn't. I think a lot of the stuff was just ignored because it was in Chicago for whatever reason. But 1961 and the University of Chicago Folk Festival. And it started a year after the Newport Folk Festival, and a lot of the people who organized the Newport Folk Festival were instrumental in setting up the University of Chicago Folk Festival. So there was a student named Mike Fleischer who was enthusiastic about the music, like everyone in this group, and he solicited them and was writing letters back and forth to people around the country, and he was galvanizing this festival. And it was the same time that Bob Dylan was making his way out of Minnesota, would eventually end up in New York. But it wasn't a straight journey. He didn't just drive from Minnesota to New York. He went to Madison. He went back to Minnesota. He was kind of jogging around some of these areas. And he spent about a month at Hyde Park at that time. Because when you think about it, like if you were interested in acoustic string bass guitar music, there weren't a lot of places to go find people like you. And so you had to go to college campuses and you had to go to like guitar shops or places like that. And there was a infamous guitar shop at 57th Street where a lot of people hung out. Michael Bloomfield, who would later become Dylan's guitarist, hung out there. He lived on the North Shore and would take the train down. And so Dylan played around campus. He played in the dorms. He was on the radio, student radio, and he was just another kid playing Woody Guthrie songs at the time. But yeah, I interviewed people who remembered him and remember that he wasn't very good. It always goes with Dylan about his voice. People really hated his voice, which is even scragglier back, right in the very beginning, because it wasn't. People were not used to like a folk voice, like a really, that whether it was a put on or not. It wasn't just like, folk music was presented by like these guys singing very cleanly, like the Kingston Trio. And here's Bob Dylan, who's sounding like he's under a rock or he emerged from the fog. And so, but I found that funny because everyone said the exact same thing.
Well, he was a work in progress,
Yeah.
Not that he achieved Michael Bublé levels, but I can imagine just starting out, it had to, we all started.
He was doing his own songs too. He got really good at delivering them, and he was a great enunciator, and he could really sing. I think he became a better songwriter or better singer when he was doing his own material.
Right.
Later on. Yeah.
So how long did that fest run in Hyde Park?
It is still running.
It's still running? How do I not know this?
Every February. And what's amazing about that, so the Newport became a very big outdoor festival, and it's still, it's still a wonderful festival, but it became a place where you had a lot of A-list stars go, so it's got a lot of money behind it. What's amazing and also kind of cool about the University of Chicago Folk Festival is that it is run exactly the same way it was run from the very beginning. It is student run. Only no faculty members are involved. The students run it, which means they find the artist, they have a budget, they staff it, and publicize it. It's completely student run, and it's in Mandel Hall. It's in the same exact place that it was in 1961 too. So this beautiful whole hall in on the University of Chicago campus. It's every February. It's the exact same time. So it's in February, which is a terrible time to be in Chicago, but that's where it's located. And you probably didn't hear about it because it's still, time came and went. I think they still have. They don't focus on stars. They've had everybody. They've had blues people, bluegrass people, Celtic musicians, everyone under the sun. Muddy Waters has played it. The Staple Singers played it back in the early days. They really find, at the time, just musicians who were represented different strains of American music and non-commercial music. So, yeah.
It's interesting because even like if I take a corollary of the Chicago Blues Festival, back when we were in high school, people like John Lee Hooker and Albert King, these giants are playing the Chicago Blues Fest. But now I look at a listing and I'm lucky if I recognize 2 or 3 names out of like the 40 people listed. So
yeah,
it must just be the way music is now. Is like there's not as much publicity for some of these genres like blues and folk, and they're not household names.
Yeah, no, it's there's a little, this whole kind of resurgence of Americana music. That's helped in a bit because it's such a wide umbrella term that it includes a lot of blues artists too, or at least people seem open to hearing, people they may not know about or on the radio. But, blues music and folk music and, traditional country music, bluegrass, interest in all that music has, if you look at the wide history of, let's say since the 50s, it's come and gone. I mean, there's been peaks of it. Like if you think about in the 70s, Will the Circle Be Unbroken? When the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band did that, it was like a triple record. And it had these guys playing with a lot of older country people, and it was a massive record. And it had it started this resurgence of interest in people like Earl Scruggs back in the 70s. And then that kind of died down. And then, in 2000 or so, the Old Brother Where Art Thou soundtrack had this, again, surge into, we saw this phenomenon, again, huge interest in, Ralph Stanley and older artists as well. And those songs, they're doing songs from a very long time ago. And so I think that, bluegrass music is very popular now, very mainstream now. So it's I think that, that music has always been here, but the interest in the music really is very cyclical. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, where the book heads as it winds down, talking about weird Chicago with the roots in the old music, you gain an appreciation for the fertile ground that Chicago was to generate art and music that wasn't honed by people trying to throw together a boy band, but there's a more authentic sound. People like Jeff Tweedy emerge, and not that he's doing something game changing, but he has a uniqueness that may not have come out of anywhere else but Chicago.
Right. I mean, for him especially, his wife owned a very popular rock club, and so that was a whole little scene that he came out of, that scene that had all these different types of bands and musicians, not just playing there, but also hanging out there. So it was sort of this thing. So there was kind of an aesthetic that came out of it. Yeah, I mean, Chicago's had this, again, it might sound naive, but I think it always had this kind of art for art's sakes approach to music here, because there was never, since the 30s, I guess, or 40s, when all the studios left, there was never really a commercial scene here, except for there was a jingle scene later. But you didn't necessarily come here to be a big star, but you came here, or you were from here, and you were able to kind of do what, hone your voice, really become the musicians that I kind of talk about in the last part of the book, were people that I think that in a way are very similar to the musicians in the very beginning of the book, in that they came here and they developed a voice and they did something completely unique to them. The people in the very beginning were literally creating it from scratch. They were taking these songs that kind of were around pre-electric days and kind of making and doing funky things with them to sell them to a bigger audience. And the people later in the book were kind of working against the commercialization of country music and kind of were doing their own take on it that never would have fit anywhere else but here. And then there's the second thing, because of that industry wasn't here, there was really a spirit of collaboration and experimentation. And it was just a little bit more wide open in that way. I think when you go to an industry town, you don't really see a lot of that because it's competitive. Or a lot of these people don't really, they stay in their lane. But here, there's no lanes. And so, so that's when you see people playing together who are from very different scenes, like in the jazz world and someone I always talk about, someone who's on your show, Steve Dawson, playing at a jazz club and playing with jazz musicians, even though he's more of a traditional singer-songwriter. So his music suddenly has this kind of different flavor to it. I think that's something that probably wouldn't happen anywhere else. And I think because of there's not a real, the bottom line is not really the end goal here. And not to say that musicians don't want money. Of course they do, and they want to make a living, but you can make more of a living here working as because it's a little cheaper to live here and all that. Or if you don't want to make a living as a musician, you can still play music very seriously and be with very serious-minded people on the weekends and at nights whenever you want to play. So there's a very high level of musicianship here, even though the people aren't necessarily session players in Nashville.
Right. Yeah. The music's at a world-class level here, even if it's not getting the hype that it may deserve. So when you wrote those last words of the book and you're typing "the end" in all caps, how did that impact, looking back over the book, how did that impact your appreciation for Chicago and the music scene here?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. After the book was published, or maybe after I was finishing it before it was published, one thing that kind of changed that wasn't really the case when I was writing the book over all those years is that there's just been this really, it actually came out of this. It's exactly everything I was talking about in the book. I felt very validated that this kind of singer-songwriter scene kind of like got very busy here. So there's all these singer-songwriters here now and songwriter nights and people who are doing it because they feel like they have to do it, and they're not, the music industry really doesn't exist anymore at the level it does. So I think people are more realistic about why they do music. And so this kind of like everything I was talking about, like in the 70s, maybe without the drugs, are kind of happening now. Or it was really like the 70s, it was like the 50s and the 70s and the 90s, and then stuff going on now. I felt like really validated in a way because I was recognizing, oh, okay, I just wrote this book that talks about all this stuff, what makes the character of the city unique. And we're going through a boom right now that's very similar to the 70s scene. And that was completely unexpected. I did not see that coming whatsoever. I think there was kind of a little lull what was going on when I was writing the book, because a lot of the people from the 90s and 2000s, maybe a lot of them moved out of town. A lot of them became big stars. There was a little fragmentation. Lounge acts, that bar closed. And so a lot of it had changed. And so I felt like really what I was witnessing in recent years was really like this, like flourishing of music that I was really happy to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I do also have a sense that things are on an uptick. If the music scene is a sine wave, it's above the flat line right now. So
yeah, for sure.
So, Mark, this is going to be the last podcast of 2025.
Oh,
so I spoke briefly with you ahead of time to shake your noggin. What are your favorite releases in 2025? 1 or 2, 3 records you got on your radar?
Well, I don't review music really professionally anymore, so I don't. And been working on another book all year, so I haven't been listening to a lot of music other than picking up records by people who I kind of already like. And so I admit that I'm a little behind the curve of like discovering new stuff. And also I've been listening to records that might be like 2 or 3 years old. So my list is going to be very disjointed. One new record this year that I got to say is probably up there is by this New Orleans band called Galactic. They are a incredible collective of the city's really great funk players and jazz players, and they're like major groove meisters. And they made a record with Irma Thomas, who is very famous for her hit "Time Is on My Side" that she played actually with the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
A year or so ago in New Orleans when they were in town. And they made a record of all new originals that she sings, and it's called "Audience with the Queen." And that record is really, it's really incredible. It's again, they're taking this, the singer from the past, she sounds completely vital, and they're all new songs that are kind of drawn from, drawn from her life, and it's a really great marriage of two forces. And that record, "Audience with the Queen," is one of my favorite records. Another one is "Black Dog and the Wandering Boy," and that's by James McMurtry, who is, he checks in with a new set of songs every couple of years, and I would love to find a bomb in any of those, and he really hasn't delivered one, and he's really probably one of the best songwriters out there today, and really a master of minimalism and storytelling and all of that. I love the Jeff Tweedy record, the Twilight Override, that 3 record set he put out. Mm-hmm. I think one of the reasons I like it is because it's 3 records, really force you to sit down and really live with it and get into it, which I did. And I hadn't really been crazy about his last couple of records, and this one, I think it really does it for me. So I think that one's definitely worth checking out. I mean, some of the records I've been listening to, like, I love the latest Ron Sexsmith record. The last Not a Surf record is one of my favorite bands. They put out a record this year. Ron did. Van Morrison's last record, who talk about a guy who's made about 20 years worth of terrible records. But his newest record, called Remembering Now, is really my favorite Van Morrison period is from the 80s and early 90s. And this record really harkens back to that. That it's a really deep record, and I love that record. It's called Remembering Now. And there's also a record that came out a couple of years ago, but I've been listening to it nonstop. I cannot put this record down, called really, it's just one woman, but she records under the name Hooray for the Riff Raff. And that last record of hers is just like, man, I can't get enough of it. It's so good.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a lot more, but those are the ones that kind of like, jumped on my head. I feel like I'm a big record collector, and so when I buy stuff, it tends to be older, and so I'm always kind of discovering stuff that I should have heard a million years ago, but didn't. But my head's really been down on this book, so that's one of the reasons why I haven't really been fully on top of the new record list. But yeah, those are definitely ones that pop to mind for me.
Are you at liberty to talk about the book you're working on at this point, or?
Right now, I kind of rather not, because it's not really a music book. So I kind of, you can have me on again if you want. Although it's a music podcast, so maybe you won't. But I'm working on the third book. I am working on a book after that, which is a music book, and I've been doing interviews for it for the last year and a half. So I'm working on these 2 things simultaneously: the music book interviews, and I'll start writing that book sometime maybe in the summer. And once I finish this current book, I probably shouldn't, because it has nothing to do with music. It has something more to do with like public event that happened a couple years ago, and so I got to keep it under wraps for now.
Sure, you may have said too much already.
Yes, exactly. You pulled it out of me.
I'm going to be Googling public events.
Yeah, you'll be able to. Yeah, of course. Yeah,
I'm on to you, Mark.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you'll find it.
So you mentioned Van Morrison, and there was. Do you remember the album Enlightenment?
Oh yeah, that's a great one. That's one of his best.
God, that is like, it's not one of his better known ones, but when that came out, that was such a big part of my life, and Oh, yeah.
That's the parody I love. And there's my favorite record of his is one that's even lesser known than that, which I don't understand. I don't think it got a lot of distribution over here at all. Because I tracked down a vinyl copy. I don't think it was ever even released in vinyl over here. Called "Hymns to the Silence." It's a double record. Try to find that. And I don't even think it's on streaming. Even it's weird. I have no idea why. I mean, I don't understand why that record. I think it's one of his best records he's ever made. That record was definitely a big life changer for me. Oh, another great record this year was Paul Seabar's last record. That was fantastic. Paul Seabar, who famously is from Milwaukee, great band leader and songwriter up in Milwaukee. He put out a great record this year as well, and and a new record in quite a long time too. So,
Sweet.
Yeah, that was definitely a big highlight for me.
Yeah, I've got notes to check out the Galactic one and that one.
That one, yeah,
because I don't know. I have sources that I use like regularly, like No Depression and Country Universe and a couple others. But maybe because Galactic is more funk, it didn't get on.
Yeah, no, the whole record is great from start to finish. I mean, yeah, it's really definitely worth checking out. I'm so impressed with that. Her singing is wonderful, and she sounds, man. And I wish they're not really doing a tour at all together. They did do one or two shows in New Orleans, but she doesn't really get out of New Orleans a lot. Kind of to go down there to hear her.
How old is she now?
She must be close to 80. She must be 80-ish, early 80s, 80, yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah. I
mean, even Time Is on My Side is. It's got some age itself, right there.
That's right. So, yeah, the Rolling Stones covered it in the same year she put it out, and they never met. All those years later, they never met until like 2 years ago. They met. Yeah, it's kind of a good story.
All right. Well, Mark, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. I'm an honor that you had me, especially for your last one of 2025.
Yeah. Did I say 2026? Did I? You're so gracious in not correcting me. I think I said it last.
I don't know what you said.
I'll have to review the tape.
Yeah, just put a drop in. You'll edit that out.
I'm going to go to the Jewel, and while I'm driving there, I think I said 2026. But
all right, well, you're thinking ahead.
I'm calling myself out.
Let's get the hell out of this year. You're trying to cancel this year, so I'm all for that.
Let's speed dial into 2027 or maybe even 2028 at this point. So, all right. So the book is Country and Midwestern. Where do you recommend people find it?
Well, the University of Chicago Press published it. You get it on their site, the University of Chicago Press. Just Google that, you'll find it. It's on Amazon. It's you can find it at your local bookseller, depending on where you live. And it's widely distributed, so it's you'll be able to find it wherever you go. I saw it on the shelf at the Country Music Hall of Fame. So it is at the Country Music Hall of Fame, which I'm very proud of because then they've been very gracious. They did an event for the book, which I was really excited about. That was very validating. And I'm going to pat myself on the back here because yesterday, this is only because it's new. Yesterday, I'm looking at it right now, hold it up to the camera here. I got a note from Marty Stewart.
Oh, wow.
He wrote me a card to tell me how much he thought the book, how much he loved the book, and he called it masterfully done. It really was validating because he's he's an incredible artist, but also he's really
he's carrying the torch.
Yeah, I mean he knows. I mean he's the guy who knows that history backwards and forwards. So to have him say that that he got a lot out of it, I felt pretty good about that. So
did he put some fabulous superlatives in the note he wrote you?
You're not the first person who said that. I think he did. Yeah, I got to go Google superlatives though. Once I do, I'll let you know.
All right. Well, Once again, Mark, thank you so much. This is a great, insightful conversation, and I thank you for writing the book. I learned a lot, and if the listener doesn't have a sense yet of the great stories that are in that book, let me say that you should.
Yeah, there's a website, countryandmidwestern.com, if you want to learn more about it too.
Okay, is that like your official site?
Yeah, okay. Countryandmidwestern.com. Yeah.
Okay. It has links to your TikTok and your.
Yeah, I don't have TikTok, but it has links probably to all that stuff. It's got a link to where you could buy it too.
All right.
Yeah, and reviews and all that sort of stuff.
Excellent. All right, Mark. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom.
We'll catch you in one of these upcoming years.
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right.
All right. See you later.